Hirohito never said the name. Not in the speech, not after, not once, but by August 1945, Unit 731 had already destroyed itself. Buildings leveled, records burned, staff were given orders that left no path to surrender, because if the paper trail survived, the Emperor might not. This is the story of how Japan erased Unit 731 to make sure Hirohito survived. It begins with a question: why did one unit act like the war was over before Japan admitted defeat? At this time, most of Japan's leadership hadn't accepted defeat yet. The Emperor hadn't spoken. The cabinet was deadlocked. Generals were still arguing for a final stand. Some wanted to arm civilians with sharpened bamboo and fight to the last body. But one unit acted like the war had already ended. What made them move ahead of Tokyo? On August 9th, 1945, Soviet forces crossed into Manchuria with over 1 million troops. The attack came fast, faster than the Japanese had expected. Stalin had promised to enter the Pacific War within 3 months of Germany's defeat, and he kept his word almost to the day. Within hours of the invasion, the same day the bomb fell on Nagasaki, Unit 731 began erasing itself. This wasn't a slow wind-down. Ministries in Tokyo sent explicit orders: destroy all incriminating materials in Pingfang. And they did. The roughly 300 prisoners still held at the facility were eliminated. These were the last of the logs, the term Unit 731 used for human test subjects. Men, women, children, kept alive for ongoing experiments. Now they were a liability. The 600 Chinese and Manchurian laborers who had built and maintained the compound were killed as well. They knew too much, the layout and what the buildings were for. Staff were given final orders that left no option of surrender. Former Unit 731 member Hideo Shimizu later testified that he was ordered to eliminate physical remains and remove anything that could be identified. Nothing could be left behind. It was all evidence. No one in Tokyo had publicly accepted surrender yet. The Emperor wouldn't speak for another 6 days, but the men in Manchuria already understood what it meant if they lost. Because this wasn't a battlefield unit. It was a facility full of documentation. Unit 731 preemptively erased itself because it understood the real danger wasn't defeat. It was survival with a paper trail. But notice how they destroyed it. High-level military programs usually shut down methodically: exit briefings, data preservation, staff reassignments. A classified facility might take weeks to decommission. Files boxed, personnel debriefed, knowledge transferred to the next project. So why did this one self-destruct in a panic? Ishishiro, the unit's commander, gave a single instruction: take the secret to the grave. No exit orders, no protocol for demobilization, no effort to preserve 13 years of research output, no thought given to what that research might be worth to a future Japan. Instead, demolition. The compound at Pingfang, over 150 buildings, including laboratories, prisons, and crematoriums, was blown apart. Skeleton crews detonated what they could. Some structures were too sturdy to fully destroy, but the intent was total erasure. According to later Soviet interrogations, staff understood that survival meant silence. Anyone captured would be expected to deny everything. Ishii told them to scatter, return to civilian life, never speak of what they had done. He told them to say they had worked in lumber. This wasn't about military withdrawal. This was about legal survivability. Even in their final days, they didn't treat what they had created as valuable. They treated it as fatal. The killing of prisoners and the destruction of documents signaled a belief that even fragments of evidence could bring everything down. Which raises the question, what made the evidence so dangerous? Atrocities can sometimes be hidden or reframed. Witnesses die, memories fade. A rogue commander can be blamed while leadership claims ignorance. Plausible deniability is built from gaps in the record. But what if every step was recorded, signed, and filed? Unit 731 had no such options. When the Soviets later captured personnel and built their case for the 1949 Khabarovsk trial, they didn't have to rely on testimony alone. They had 18 volumes of interrogation records and documentary material, some exceeding 400 pages of depositions. The records revealed Unit 731 as a system, not a group of doctors gone rogue, an officially sanctioned apparatus with budgets, quotas, and inspections. Division 1 handled plague, cholera, anthrax, typhoid, and tuberculosis. Tested on live prisoners. Division 2 researched battlefield deployment, methods of battlefield dissemination. Division 3 manufactured the shells to deliver them. They tracked weapon efficacy. They tracked subject responses. They tracked deployment protocols. Researchers filed reports on how long it took prisoners to die from different infections, which delivery methods caused the fastest outbreaks. And every step of that tracking required sign-offs. That's what made it dangerous. Not the scale, not the cruelty, the signatures. Because once you create paperwork, you can't claim chaos. You can't claim loss of control. You can't claim moral ambiguity. The paperwork says, we planned this, we approved this, we measured the results. Unit 731's threat came from how it operated, as a bureaucratic machine with records no one could reinterpret or deny. And those records didn't just implicate the men in Manchuria. They pointed upward. Most war crimes implicate middle managers. A colonel or general takes the fall, upper leadership denies involvement, and the chain of command gets blurry enough to protect whoever needs protecting. So why did this paper trail point up the chain of command instead of outward? Because Unit 731 wasn't built that way. In 1936, Emperor Hirohito issued an imperial decree authorizing the expansion of Ishii's gruesome research unit and its formal integration into the Kwantung Army as the Epidemic Prevention Department. This wasn't a rogue operation tolerated from the margins. It was imperially sanctioned. It had a budget line. It had a mandate. Lieutenant General Kajitsuka Ryuji, Chief of Medical Administration for the Kwantung Army, later testified that Ishii received permission to begin the Pingfang experiments by command of the Emperor. Between 1939 and 1940, Hirohito issued another decree recognizing Ishii's unit for its service. Service to the Empire. Service that involved infecting prisoners with plague and conducting fatal human experiments. And then there was Prince Mikasa, the Emperor's own brother, who toured Unit 731's facilities during the war. He later wrote in his memoir that he watched films showing Chinese prisoners made to march on the plains of Manchuria for gas experiments on humans. He watched the films. He wrote about it. The imperial family knew. The command lines were military. The funding lines were government. The awareness reached the imperial family itself. That creates vertical risk. Every document flows upward for approval. Every operational report climbs. Every authorization attaches to a higher name. There was no insulation. Unit 731 wasn't a lone horror, it was a vertically integrated program that pointed back to the Emperor. So that's what was happening in Manchuria. Now look at what Tokyo was doing at the exact same time. While one part of Japan's war machine erased itself, another part was securing a recording. Why that priority? The timing is striking. Between August 10th and August 15th, while Unit 731 was demolishing facilities and erasing physical evidence in Manchuria, the Imperial Palace was focused on something else entirely. The Emperor's voice. On the night of August 14th, NHK engineers were summoned to the palace. This was unprecedented. No emperor had ever addressed the common people directly. The voice of the throne was sacred, heard only by courtiers, ministers, generals. Now it would be captured on a phonograph disc and broadcast to the entire nation. Microphones were set up in an underground bunker beneath the Imperial Household Ministry. Just before midnight, Hirohito recorded his surrender announcement. The speech itself was vague. No list of programs, no mention of what Japan had done in China, in Korea, in Southeast Asia. Just the atomic bomb, generalized sorrow, and an instruction to endure the unendurable. The facts were omitted. The voice was protected. Because the recording wasn't for confession, it was for continuity. While evidence was incinerated in Manchuria, Tokyo ensured the Emperor's voice would survive untouched, defining the story without mentioning what was erased. And protecting that voice required its own desperate act. That night, not everyone in Tokyo wanted the war to end. Major Kenji Hatanaka was 24 years old. He believed surrender was a betrayal of everything Japan had fought for. Along with a group of junior officers, he launched a coup, the Kyujo Incident. As many as 1,000 soldiers stormed the Imperial Palace, determined to stop the broadcast. They believed that if they could destroy the recording before it aired, they could still turn the war around. They never found them. By dawn on August 15th, Loyal troops from the Eastern District Army had surrounded the palace. The coup collapsed. At noon, Hirohito's voice played across Japan for the first time. Farmers stopped in their fields. Factory workers gathered around radios. Soldiers wept. Most couldn't fully understand the formal court language, but they understood enough. The voice survived, the symbol endured, and not a single word of it mentioned what had been erased in Manchuria days earlier. Now listen to what that protected voice actually said, or rather, what it didn't. You might expect Japan to distance itself from Unit 731, to condemn it, to use the surrender as an opportunity for disavowal. Governments do this. They sacrifice the indefensible to preserve the core. Why did it pretend the program didn't exist instead? The speech didn't euphemize. Unit 731. It didn't reference biological warfare, human experimentation, or Manchuria's laboratories at all. No hints, no blame, no remorse, not even a veiled acknowledgement. Hirohito spoke of the atomic bomb. He spoke of Japan's desire for peace and stability. He asked his subjects to endure. But the program that bore his imperial authorization, the one with the budgets, the sign-offs, the 1936 decree, was absent. That's not oversight. That's insulation. Because to name something is to connect yourself to it. And the throne could not afford connections to a program with signatures, reports, and a paper trail that climbed upward. So instead of disavowal, they chose deletion. Unit 731 became unspeakable, not because it was shameful, but because it was documented. The omission wasn't an oversight. It was a calculated silence that quarantined the emperor from a documented liability. The silence continued after the war ended, but the outcomes weren't silent at all. After the war, some actors were punished, others were protected. What guided the sorting? The throne was preserved. No tribunal touched the emperor. General Douglas MacArthur met with Hirohito and decided he was more useful as a symbol of continuity than as a defendant. The Americans needed a stable Japan. A trial would have destabilized everything. But Unit 731's officers weren't so fortunate, at least not the ones the Soviets captured. In December 1949, the Khabarovsk war crimes trial convened. 12 Japanese military personnel stood accused: manufacturers and users of biological weapons, architects of human experimentation. Among the defendants, General Otozo Yamada, commander-in-chief of the million-man Kwantung Army, the man who oversaw the entire Manchurian occupation. Major General Kiyoshi Kawashima, former chief of Unit 731, who testified that in 1941 his unit airdropped plague-infected fleas on the Chinese city of Changde. He described it in detail. He didn't deny it. The lead Soviet prosecutor was Lev Smirnov, the same man who had prosecuted Nazis at Nuremberg. He knew how to build a case for crimes against humanity. He had the documents. The trial lasted 5 days. All 12 were found guilty. Sentences ranged from 2 to 25 years in Siberian labor camps. And none of Japan's remaining institutions defended them. They weren't reframed as heroes. They weren't hidden. They weren't folded into a national redemption arc. They were sacrificed, because by that point, their value was zero. Their exposure was useful, and that exposure created a clear boundary. This is how far accountability goes. Everything above this line remains. Unit 731's exposure was permitted to shield the institution above it, confirming which legacy mattered most. But even that isn't the full picture, because what happened next wasn't justice. It was sorting. Justice implies judgment, but this felt pre-decided. What was really being done? The Soviets tried 12 men, but the Americans, who captured Ishishiro himself, made a different calculation. In exchange for Unit 731's research data, the United States granted immunity to the program's architects. General Douglas MacArthur approved the deal. The Truman administration paid between 150,000 and 200,000 yen for the records that documented experiments on live human beings. Ishii was never prosecuted. He lived quietly in Japan, consulted occasionally on matters of biological defense, and died in 1959, a free man. When the Khabarovsk verdicts were announced, the US dismissed them as communist propaganda. The same evidence that convicted 12 men in a Soviet court was rejected as unreliable by the Americans, who had their own copies of the data. So the sorting wasn't just Japan protecting the emperor. It was a three-way arrangement. The Soviets prosecuted the men they captured and extracted what they could. The Americans shielded the architects and got the data. Japan erased the program from public memory and kept the throne intact. No one tried to morally process what Unit 731 had done. No museum, no reckoning, no revision. The panic before surrender matched the silence after. No public link was acknowledged. No speech connected the two, but every action showed awareness of the same underlying threat. If the paper trail reached too far upward, the war wouldn't end with surrender. It would end with reckoning,